it's only the Holy Spirit that can bring about faith as well. Like, we cannot on our own ability conjure up faith.
Welcome to Leftovers, the Trinity Church podcast that refuses to let the good stuff get forgotten in the back of the fridge. Every sermon series, there are moments, ideas, and threads we didn't get to fully unpack. So this is where we pull them back out, warm them up, and give them the attention they deserve. Instead of letting these leftovers go cold, we're coming back for a second helping of something worth savoring. Let's dig in.
Hey there, welcome to the Trinity Church podcast, and specifically our Leftovers series, in which we get to tackle things that could have come up during our message series, particularly escaping Egypt, but got left on the cutting room floor because cut for time. There was more important stuff to talk about, but the story of the Exodus is so incredibly rich. And so if you want to keep the conversation going and you want to know all the fun facts, this is the place where we can have a conversation about the stuff that didn't make it into the message, but is still edifying for our faith. And so because both Pastor Matt and I have been preaching on our Escaping Egypt series, we got both of us here today to kind of talk about what didn't get talked about on Sunday. And so, Matt, what were some of your initial impressions of things that got left out?
Well, as you were saying, Exodus is a really big book. And we're doing like 10 weeks total or something?
8 weeks, yeah.
There's going to be a lot of detail that we don't get to. And so we're hitting on the big things. But there's so much that we miss from week to week that we just don't have time for. So in week one, as you were prepping and preaching, what were the things that you were like, okay, I can't have time to add this in, but I would love to have it in, but for time, this has to get cut.
Yeah. I think it was interesting that I was really concerned about telling the parts of the story that people were unfamiliar with, rather than the parts that people were familiar with. And so I was so glad that I got to talk about Shifra and Puah, the midwives that make this kind of bold defense of Israelite babies by tricking Pharaoh and making sure that...
Because we normally kind of read right past it.
Yeah, we read right past that.
I think normally in that section, we probably focus a lot on Moses being in the water.
Yeah.
Although we tend to have our details mixed on that, I would say, because we picture a lot of extra with it of Moses floating for long periods of time and things like that. But that... Yeah, I would say in your message that probably stood out to me the most, is that you really keyed in on the midwives and their response to Pharaoh. And obviously with their response, Moses and other boys survive. Moses ends up surviving and ends up in the palace.
And that's the part that we seem to be most familiar with. Of Moses gets put in the Nile. Yeah. He eventually is found by Pharaoh's daughter. And I do think one of the untold part of that story is both Moses' mother's intentionality, that she's not just like floating him down the river and like praying to God, be like, keep him safe while crocodiles are like snapping. But she knows where Pharaoh's daughter comes to the river to bathe and intentionally places the basket in the reeds so he doesn't float down the river. And so with the hopes that Pharaoh's daughter is going to find her, and with the added layer of intentionality of having Moses' sister watching him the whole time, which is interesting that we know that one of Moses' sisters is named Miriam, but his sister in this story is not identified.
Yeah, which could be Miriam, but we are not told that.
But we're not told that. Yeah. So we stay agnostic about whether that's Miriam or not. Yeah. And so I think what gets missed in that story is the faithfulness and cleverness of Moses' mom. Yeah. That she really has an intention of saving her boy and not just leaving it up to the gods.
It is likely, we don't know because there's not a lot of detail in this section after that to when he murders somebody, but it's likely that she actually raised him for several years then, because she
Well, it
was
says
wet
it
nurse.
until he was done weaning, which
Yeah.
could have been up to 2 years old,
Yeah.
3 years old before sending him back to the palace.
Yeah. And it's even possible that there was still relationship after that time of like, yeah, come caretake for this child. But we don't get any really direction. Like obviously the 10 Commandments movie, Prince of Egypt, all these that we've had through Hollywood paint a much broader picture of like, oh, well, this is possibly what could have happened.
Yep.
But we don't really have any detail on any of those details. So
And yeah, Hollywood loves to imagine what Moses' upbringing.
Yeah.
But then they tend to gloss over his like middle of his life, which the Bible actually does spend time on, and we didn't spend time on Sunday talking about that. But I do think it's really interesting that once he goes to Midian, so he murders a guy, everybody finds out, he flees, and he runs to this well where there's a bunch of mean shepherds who are harassing this group of 7 sisters who have come to the well to draw water. And Moses like runs these guys off and says like, no, ladies, like come get your water. They go home to their dad, who is the priest of Midian. His name is Jethro.
which
and
is interesting itself.
And we don't know what he's a priest of.
Yeah. Because it does feel like he knows God, like there's some connection to like, maybe he actually is connected to the real true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to some degree, because it seems,
we don't know.
but it doesn't. It gives us zero definition around that.
No
just
definition.
Priest of Midian.
But I do love that Jethro is like matchmaker. He's like, oh, so this random guy saved you? Why don't you invite him to come eat with us? And then eventually like marries him off to Zipporah, one of his daughters. And so like he's like playing matchmaker. He's like, seems like a good guy. Like, let's meld him into the family. And then I think a little bit of a crossover between both yours and I was that in between period. In between him fleeing from Egypt and then eventually going back to Egypt. Yeah. And so what were some of the interesting moments for you about Moses's life in between leaving Egypt and going back to Egypt?
So I got to walk into the burning bush. And but it's very clear he's been living in Midian a while.
Yeah.
A good while. Like 40 children.
Years?
So, and you almost wonder, well, how old are your children? Like, and he probably has many children because that would have been the norm. So, but we go to this experience where Moses has this burning bush. The Lord speaks into his life, tells him, hey, you're going to go do this. And so when I was walking through this, I would say probably the biggest thing that stood out for me that I didn't get to walk into, and you got to walk into it a little bit this last week, is he actually observes and says, Moses, this is how everything's going to play out. Like he gives him the story of what is going to happen in advance, at least in the broad detail of saying, hey, you're going to go. And he uses this language, Israel is my firstborn son. And so he points to that, and then he says, he's going to say, you're going to let my son Israel go, let my people go so that they can serve me. But the Pharaoh is going to refuse to let you go. But then it uses this language of, so then I will harden your heart, basically. And this is the first time we hear that, where God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will not release you until I strike your firstborn son.
Which is a fascinating thing for us to wrestle with as believers on like, how does God work?
Yeah.
Because when you read the story of Exodus and you read the plagues, it feels very reactive. Like it feels like God sends a plague, Pharaoh says, take it away. And God does. Yeah. And Pharaoh's like, yeah, I'll let him go. I changed my mind. Yeah. And it feels very reactive of like, okay, I guess it didn't work this time. Let's try again. But God already has the whole story mapped out.
Yeah. And it's interesting because going kind of the crossover of yours and mine here of the hardened heart part, there's times where it says God hardened his heart. And there's times where it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart.
Yeah.
So we could go have a fun conversation about bound will and free will and all these fun things. We won't get into that, but there is an aspect like of, so if God hardens his heart, which I think it can be a difficult space for us to sit in at times in terms of like, well, what does that mean then about the character of God and who we are? But it also gives us an understanding of how we understand Scripture through our faith lens, is that it's only the Holy Spirit that can bring about faith as well. Like, we cannot on our own ability conjure up faith. And I think to some degree that's the same type of language that we're seeing when it says that God hardened his heart. And that would be the same as having ears to hear, eyes to see, because we can hear and see, we could hear the gospel hundreds of times, and it's like we have a rock hard heart and are unable to experience it. But then that one time, for some reason, we hear it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I compare that language of hardened heart to our own experience of faith being able to take root in our lives. So
yeah, I think that's a really good comparison, because I think it is both the natural state that Pharaoh doesn't want to believe in any God except for himself, and that is his thing. And God does not bless him with the gift of the Holy Spirit to come to faith. That it needs to kind of be a both and in some circumstances. And I'm fascinated with it, because I ask myself the question, it seems like there's a utility to it, that God says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so that my signs and wonders can multiply. And so there's a little bit of like, I'm going to intentionally take this hardened heart and make sure that it doesn't soften, so that you can see what my will is and what my ways are. And I just wonder, do you feel like that happens today, where God intentionally hardens people's heart to try to get other people, to follow some sort of plan that he has set out for us?
That's hard. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm sure God works the same today as he always has. So probably, I just don't know how I would lay that out in terms of being able to see it and experience it. I don't know that we always have eyes to see within our own space and time. It's way easier to look back.
Yeah. And it's something that I've grappled with, because I think sometimes, I think everybody sometimes runs into situations where they have tough relationships, where it feels like there is somebody whose heart is hardened towards you, and you're like, man, I didn't deserve this. Like, what's going on here? And like, I've been able to meditate on moments in my life where either leaving a relationship behind or leaving a situation behind because of somebody's hardened heart was necessary for me to live into God's full purposes for my life. And in some ways, I'm like, dang, God, I know that you needed to use this person to slam a door to get me to walk through the one you wanted me to, even though it's still kind of hurt in the moment to get me there.
Yeah. And I think I might compare it to just the general understanding of, we have no ability to see long term. We're always very short term in our mindset and how we see things. And so we want things that we want, and we don't always consider the long-term implications, where God has a far broader and fuller view of this. And we see that in his language of, this is Moses, this is how it's all going to get laid out. I'll give you the big picture, and ultimately your people will be set free. So yeah. But yeah, the hardened heart one is, there's a lot of layers to that that's hard to unpack and sit in at times, I think it just makes a lot of people uncomfortable too to have that conversation. So
it is uncomfortable, in part because it makes us feel like we have so much less control than we want to think we have, to believe that God not only affects our situation, but also can affect our own hearts and minds as well. Yeah. Like, it feels intrusive in a way.
So week 3.
Yeah.
So you had the hard heart part, but you also had a lot of plagues.
Plagues.
And you walked into them, but but you had to kind of bide your time in it because we could sit for weeks on the plagues, really.
We could have spent weeks on unpacking the plagues. And I briefly mentioned this, but what I really, if I had more time, I would have loved to nerd out on how God, through these signs and wonders, was proclaiming that he is God above the Egyptian gods, that his power supersedes the gods that the Egyptians were worshiping. And what's really fascinating is that we come from a monotheistic faith where eventually the narrative gets to be that Yahweh is the only God. And yet the way that Exodus is written, it's not that other gods don't exist, but that Yahweh is more powerful than all of them. And God is the creator of the universe.
He's God of gods.
And all of these other supernatural powers and entities either are only minorly powerful or like are limited in their power. And so you have this whole pantheon of Egyptian gods. And with each of these signs and wonders, Yahweh is refuting their power or mocking their power as well. And that's something that we miss culturally because we're just not familiar with the Egyptian gods. And so I would love to just like really quickly like nerd out with you for a second and talk about what those refutations were. And so
you want to just go plague by plague or signs and wonders?
Yeah, sign by sign. Again, that was an interesting fun fact that we did talk about on Sunday is that God doesn't think of these as plagues. He doesn't think of them
as showing his greatness.
He's showing his greatness. These aren't natural disasters that are meant to kill people. This is supposed to show his power in a positive light. And so you have the first plague or signs and wonder, which is turning the Nile to blood. And this is interesting because there are two Egyptian gods, Hapi and Khnum, who are either the god of the Nile or the guardian of the Nile. And also the Nile is believed to be the gateway to the underworld, which is guarded by Osiris, who's one of the like highest in the pantheon of gods. And so for Yahweh to show like, look, I have the power to turn water into blood. And then there's also this weird thing with like the fish as well, that the fish die, is that Yahweh is saying, I have power over Hapi, Khnum, and Osiris.
Which is a very bold, like the Nile is life for Egypt. Like it is all of their cities would have been near or along the Nile because water provides life in desert environment. So to have this happen would have been a huge tragedy for most of the people experiencing it. And imagine the terror also for people experiencing it.
It's like, this is where they get water to drink, water to bathe. This is how they water their crops. And for that to turn into blood would have been terrifying.
So plague or sign number two
is frogs, which is a swarm of frogs cover the land of Egypt and enter into people's homes. And it says get into their ovens and like muck up their cooking utensils and into their beds. And this one is a little bit interesting because there is a god, Heket, who is a goddess of fertility, and she is symbolized through a frog head. She's a human body and a frog head. And so there's a little bit of like, this feels more of like a mockery of saying like, hey, you worship this goddess of frogs. Let me show you what I can do to the frogs, which is weird.
And then 3, gnats and lice.
Yeah. So you have gnats and lice, you have the flies, and you have the death of the livestock, which are all kind of 3 grouped together because all of them show Yahweh's power over animals and living things. And particularly that there are gods such as Khepri, who is represented by a scarab beetle or a fly. And then there is Hathor, which is another fertility goddess represented by a cow's head. And to say like these gnats and lice and flies and the death of the livestock all happen, show God's command over a necessary resource, over their food supply, basically.
You'd hope that the frogs would have taken care of all of these.
You know,
That's what they're supposed to eat, right?
I was gonna say, if the frogs would have come later, maybe they
right
could
after?
have cleaned
Yeah.
up the fly problem. But then you get to the sixth one,
Yeah.
which is the
Livestock?
boils,
Or
which
oh,
is
okay, we did livestock. Yeah,
Yep,
boils.
which is
6.
boils.
Yep.
And so there is this goddess Sekhmet, a goddess of healing and disease, and Isis, who is also a famous goddess. Both of them were people you would pray to for healing. And the fact that they have these skin diseases, but they can't, there's no medicine that can cure them, is God being like, pray all you want to these goddesses. They're not going to help you here.
And it probably left permanent scarring on a lot of people too.
Probably. Yep. Then
And
you
then
get
hail.
and then you get a devastating hailstorm that also starts like a wildfire that burns up the crop. It's weird to think of ice coming down, but then fire coming up.
Like fiery ice balls.
Yeah. But again, there is Seth, who is god of storms, or Set, who is the god of the storms. And this is God saying like, yeah, like Set can't help you here.
Yeah.
Like, you can pray all you want for him to take the storm away, but this is my storm and you can't stop it.
Then we get more bugs, locusts.
Yep. And kind of same thing with Set as well, is that you would also pray to Set if you wanted your crops to grow well. And so again, god of storms, god of the harvest.
Because you would have had, if locusts come in, they likely are devouring any kind of crop that was there. So, so you're talking after effect of hunger as well.
Then the ninth plague is darkness. And this one is very obvious that it is a refutation of Ra, who is king of the gods and the sun god. And so for God to be like, look, I can turn out the lights on you whenever I want, is showing that Ra doesn't have power here. I do. Which is incredible. Now, what was interesting as I was listening to some of the Bible Project on this, Tim Mackey, who is the theologian behind it, he refers to these not as the 10 plagues, but the acts of decreation. Something that I had never thought about before is that in the same way that the acts of creation happen in sets of 3.
God created light.
That these are also in the same vein as Genesis 1. That they are grouped in groups of 3. So the first 3 are grouped together. The middle 3 are grouped together. And then the last 3. So you get the 9 before the Passover. And they are all acts of decreation that God has created, but then God can also decreate and destroy whatever it is that he wants, which I thought was a fascinating way to look at it.
Which culminates in the death of the firstborn.
And this one is interesting because Pharaoh himself would have claimed that he is a god. And this last one is to say, look, you don't even have the power to save your own son. Like you think that you're a god, and yet you, Pharaoh, do not have power here. And so that's kind of where we get into the Passover story, which as you reflect on your message about that really delves deep into the Passover, what kind of things felt like you didn't have enough time to talk about?
So it's interesting coming out of the 10 plagues. Part of what the chapters I walk into, 12 and 13, really amplify is God's power over the Egyptian gods. Like he uses the language of, so that I can basically defeat the Egyptian gods. So like he's very clearly attacking them in that language. But it's interesting, throughout 12 and 13, we walk through a lot of the Passover observance and language, which ends up becoming like such a key component in remember this, like to pass down from generation to generation, where like they're told, like, make sure you do this exactly like this. And there's a lot of observance that we're not going to walk into this week of how to do things that is meant for the people to do a certain way so that when their kids ask, why do we do this? The exact response is,
let me tell you the story.
And that's like, it's written out that way of like, so that your child can know, so that you'll have the opportunity, because your kid will ask, now you can tell them. And so much is in how the observance takes place. I don't get to walk into the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which I think it's interesting because I don't think it's something we ever talk about really. Like we talk about Passover some, just because Exodus is so bold with that. And then the language that we're going to walk into in the New Testament is so forward with that as well with Jesus. But the Feast of the Unleavened Bread,
it's a different thing.
Yeah. But it is so connected to the Passover.
Yep.
So as soon as the Passover ends, 7 days of observance happens following the Passover, and they walk through all the details of how to celebrate. And it's all about unleavened bread, a meal together. We'll walk into in week 4. We do walk into the be prepared part of it, like having your sandals, like you're supposed to eat this meal ready to run, ready to go. And so we'll walk into that part more than we'll walk into the actual unleavened bread feast. But what is so cool, and we'll walk into this a bit with the Passover, is so much of this is connected directly into Jesus last week with the Passover festival, walking into the sacrament of the altar for the Last Supper. Like all of these things come into culmination both in the Exodus Passover and then at Jesus' final week as well. So just beautiful play out of what's about to come through. So and then I didn't get to spend a lot of time on the last bit either, where like it talks about that Pharaoh finally lets them go. They leave, but God takes them on the long route.
Yeah.
So do you find it interesting that he's like, I'm not going to take you the quickest way because you'll get scared of the Philistines and then you'll want to go back to Egypt?
Well, so that's the two things that I think are fascinating, is that it's not like they get lost by accident.
No.
It says that they are following a pillar of fire.
Yeah, yeah.
And so God's intention is for them to not go the direct way. And the explanation is like, don't run into the Philistines right away because you'll get scared. But then also, it also sets up the moment of the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
And there's a little piece of me that is like, God, did you just want to show off again?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But it's very clear. I will take them into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Instead of going straight, which would have landed them in the Philistines' lap, which understandably, okay, we're probably not ready for the Philistines yet.
Yep.
Like they weren't really ready for them later in Saul's time even. So it's understandable. He takes them through the wilderness route. But there is, that kind of sets us up for what's about to happen, where they're basically, we end with them on the edge of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
It talks about this pillar that guides them both day and night. Like they're walking day and night is what it says. So they're moving as a company, and they get to the Red Sea, and that's where we'll pick up the story again.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you appreciated all of these lines and tangents that we wish we could have gone on but didn't. Hopefully this conversation was edifying to you. We would love to keep the conversation going. And so if there was stuff that you were thinking about that we didn't talk about either here or on Sunday, please ask the question either in emails or in Facebook comments, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. But until then, thank you for joining us, and keep tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.